much an teachta Catherine Connolly.
Míle mágad a Cahirley agus tá trocanómid agam an bhfuil?
Trocanómid.
Tar míle mágad. Cai mé rá seo hé an túrascáil. Tá sé léite agam, níl sé éasca é a léamh, ach tá sé sin tiltte ag na híbertí agus ag muintir na tíra agus go háirithe de Garda Síochána, mar tá siad thar a bheith tábhachtún. Ní féidir socí sibhialta a bheith agan, gan muinín a bheith aganje as na Garda Síochána. Chairperson, that is the report. 369 pages, separate from the appendices. I've taken the trouble to read it, every single line, every single page. And I think perhaps if the Minister for Justice had read it, and indeed if the Commissioner had read it, and there's still time, they might have given a different statement. And when the Minister referred to some investigations being defective, if she had read the report, she would have found out that O'Higgins said every single investigation that he looked at was defective. And I'll come back to the Commissioner's statements in relation to her difficulty in communicating her instructions, which I don't accept at all that there's any difficulty, but I'll come back to that. And so we'll place this report in context, and it has been referred to already by Deputy Ryan. We've had the Morris Tribunal, which found corruption and neglect, and he attributed corruption and neglect to a number of Garda in Donegal not too long ago. That commission of inquiry, or that tribunal of inquiry, at a Conservative estimate, has cost over €100 million in relation to the costs, the legal costs, and also significantly in relation to compensating the significant victims. And in addition to the two main victims, we had approximately 55 other civil actions arising from that, and the taxpayer, quite rightly for the victims, picked up the tab. And then we had the Smithwick Tribunal, which reported in December 2013 and clearly found that there was collusion between the Garda Síochána and the IRA. On top of that, we've had the GSOC involved in this as well, and involved in other investigations, and as far back as 2013 they expressed the most serious concern that the recommendations of Morris hadn't been implemented, and that there was a culture that wasn't conducive to those implementing those recommendations. And on top of that background and other investigations at Cahirley that I really won't use my time to go into, strangely enough, in the preface and acknowledgements, he puts in the most serious, which has already been referred to by Deputy Ryan on page 11. Justice O'Higgins acknowledged that they received cooperation from all persons. And then he goes on to say, however, the compliance with the obligation of making discovery by the Gardaí was unsatisfactory. This is in 2015, notwithstanding all of the history of investigations. In 2015, the obligation of making discovery by the Gardaí was unsatisfactory. A large volume of documents were not provided in a timely fashion, and as late as the 12th of October 2015, the Commission was informed that many documents had not been discovered. And then, in circumstances where these documents were readily available in Baileybury Garda Station, the epicentre of this investigation, the failure to disclose them at the outset was disappointing and difficult to understand. The late discovery of these documents by the Gardaí was unhelpful and frustrating, and the Commission would have expected better from Garda Síochána. This is 2015 non-cooperation. Let me, before I go any further into the body of the report, say as a councillor, and my experience is that the people want community policing. They want a good relationship with the Gardaí, and they want them on the grounds. And without that, we cannot have a civilised society. And you yourself know at Cahirley the importance of the lack of policing that has led to the terrible situation in inner city Dublin. And still, the representatives of that community want the guards. And Sergeant McCabe is an exemplary and a model role for the good guards on the ground that have persisted and persisted against all the odds, the bullying, the harassment, Morris the rat that has already been mentioned by Deputy Daly, Disciplinary proceedings, which I'll come back to, which the Commission note as extraordinary, that Sergeant McCabe was going to be subjected to disciplinary proceedings, the only person in Chapter 11 that was going to be subjected to disciplinary proceedings in the context of major sexual abuse by Father Malai of a 14-year-old boy. I should also say that these incidences arise in 2007 and into 2008 at a time where the government at the time had no problem deploying Gardaí down to Mayo to police on behalf of Shell, a multinational for-profit company, against the people. I was there, I witnessed it, I have the photographs where I was photographed by guards and I photographed them as we stood in solidarity with the people, and millions of taxpayers' money went in policing. And at the same time, we had Baileyburgh Garda Station that I come back to, which was not fit for purpose, described in this report, not fit for purpose. The Commission went down and visited and confirmed it wasn't fit for purpose, not conducive to good policing. That was during the Celtic Tiger. Since, and now that the economy has recovered, it still remains as is. In the introduction, Chapter 1, O'Higgins sets out what's involved here, and he refers to various investigations. And he refers to the Morris Tribunal, and he says as far back as 2006, Morris identified the importance of a guard being able to speak in confidence with a designated officer in Garda headquarters should they have concerns about misconduct. In 2016, we heard two deputies yesterday, Deputy Daly and Deputy just got a blank in relation to it, Deputy Wallace, talk about their concerns in relation to the ongoing difficulties in the Midlands in relation to whistleblowers and not feeling protected. This is 2016, and this was Morris's concern back in 2006. In Chapter 2, in the approach to the inquiry, he points out what's already been mentioned, how it lasted for 34 days, went from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m, and congratulations are well done, are deserved by the people that worked solidly during that period of time for the common good, and there were 97 witnesses called. However, he also points out, and at pains throughout this process, to say that it wasn't an adversarial system, that it was an inquisitorial system to bring out the evidence as best as possible. And this also goes back to the Commissioner saying that she was under a duty to instruct that there would be more or less vigorous cross-examination in relation to Sergeant McCabe's credibility. This was an inquisitorial system. And I'm going to come back to that because I don't accept at all that she can't tell us what directions we're giving. And in Chapter 3, Sergeant McCabe is described as the central figure in this commission of investigation, and he is a dedicated and committed member of An Garda Síochána. He has brought to public attention certain investigations where the public was not well served. He has also highlighted certain legitimate concerns about procedures and practices in place at Baileyburgh Garda Station. And I think he deserves that I continue to read because of the leaks that have already been highlighted by deputies and the damage that has been done to his reputation. I think it's important to balance that. So I'm going to continue to read. The events leading up to and including this commission of investigation have been extremely stressful for him and his family over a long period of time. In particular, he considered that he was being wrongly blamed for certain errors in the investigation of the Father Malai case, and he was subjected to disciplinary proceedings for the first time in his long career. There was no foundation to any disciplinary proceedings. That's further acknowledged later on. This was especially upsetting for him because he had no part in that investigation. He had also reason to believe that he was being set up and wrongly implicated in relation to important aspects of Jerry McGrath's investigation, which was particularly upsetting for him because Mr McGrath went on to murder a woman on the 7th and 8th of December 2007. It did say that he was prone to exaggeration, or overstated, but it fails to put that in context, and it's a failure that I have in relation to O'Higgins, because that description arises from the fact that on occasions Sergeant McCabe, despite his best effort, was unaware that perhaps a superintendent like Clancy was also taking action, and he wasn't made aware of that. And so when those slightly negative comments are made, they should have been put in context, and certainly in context of his persistence against all the odds to bring matters of public concern to our attention at great cost to himself. And this all began, and this again comes back to the Commissioner and the Minister. On page 24, some people, this is Judge O'Higgins, some people wrongly and unfairly cast aspersions on Sergeant McCabe's motives. Others were ambivalent about them. Who were these people? Why aren't they identified? Were they the two guards that are now the subject of GSOC? We don't know. But in that understatement, we find out that some people wrongly and unfairly cast aspersions on Sergeant McCabe's motives. Did that include the legal team on behalf of the Commissioner? And the judge goes on to say, Sergeant McCabe acted out of genuine and legitimate concerns, and the Commission unreservedly accepts his bona fides. He has shown courage and performed a genuine public service at considerable personal cost. For this he is due the gratitude not only of the public but also of the Garda Síochána. And he is a man of integrity whom the public can trust in the exercise of his duties. Now, I think Sergeant McCabe deserves that. He goes on to say, in the circumstances outlined, the Commission considers that there was a corporate closing of ranks. The Commission does not consider that this was done consciously or deliberately. And interestingly, it says there was no question of bad faith, but it clearly outlines that there was a corporate closing of ranks. And it also goes on to say that the McGinn and Byrne inquiry, which I'll come back to, gave a 5-page summary to Sergeant McCabe. He was only furnished with a 5-page summary, and the Commission acknowledges that the investigation did nothing to instil confidence that his concerns had been properly addressed. And it goes on to say that the Byrne and McGinn uphold quite a substantial number of his complaints, although that wasn't fully communicated to him as far as I can make out. I'm going to go on briefly, Chairperson, to a number of the chapters in relation to the actual incidents, and all of them, the investigations, were found defective with serious flaws. So it beholds the Commissioner and the Minister to read this and not try to belittle it by saying some, but to come in here having read it and say, how are we going to deal with this in a comprehensive manner that we can trust? We deserve that, but the victims deserve it more. In relation to Chapter 4, the King's Court bus incident. This was an incident on a bus, and the driver of that bus contacted Bailieborough Garda Station to complain of the behaviour of a number of individuals. It was treated very lightly. The Commission concludes that Miss Brown underwent a harrowing experience and was entitled to have the matter dealt with competently and professionally by the Gardaí. Unfortunately, as is evident from the findings of the Commission, her legitimate expectations in this regard were not met. Moreover, the investigation into the incident by Superintendent Heller, according to the Commission, was not particularly thorough. That was followed by an investigation by Byrne and McGinn, and significantly, a core document was not made available to them. That was the detailed statement of Miss Brown, who said she was terrified. Now, this has been touched on and raised by Deputy Coppinger yesterday in relation to gender violence, and I must say I agree with her, and it jumps out at me. This incident, the subsequent incident in relation to Miss Lynch, another woman screaming on a bus, all dealt with in a very summary and non-serious manner by the Gardaí, and it is definitely an aspect that the Gardaí and the Commissioner needs to come back to. To finish off with Mrs Brown, the Commission notes that the Garda in question demonstrated little enthusiasm in pursuing the matter, and he encouraged Miss Brown from proceeding, and the Pulse entry notes, statement of complaint withdrawn, parties resolved issues amongst themselves. That on an offer of an apology plus €150 dinner voucher, which the victim didn't accept. This about an incident where the woman, who had vast experience driving in Dublin, a bus and a taxi, was terrified, is down as the investigation of the incident was very poor. I'll move on to Chapter 5, the Lakeside Manor Hotel. Again, a victim was assaulted. The facial injuries were not insignificant, and there was a possibility he had lost consciousness. The Garda told the accused that they had CCTV footage of the accused striking the injured party. No such footage existed. The investigation was characterised by delay and error, and Sergeant McCabe's complaints were not adequately addressed in the subsequent Byrne and McGinn report. Chapter 6, 2 incidents involving Jerry McGrath, who is currently in prison for committing murder. Miss Lynch, a taxi driver in Kells, suffered a serious assault. Instead of being charged with a Section 3 assault, she was charged with a Section 2, a minor offence. When it became before the judge described it as the worst aggravated assault he had ever dealt with, and that's according to the note of the inspector who was in at the court case. The Commission says Mrs Lynch suffered a terrible ordeal, and but for her considerable courage and quite remarkable presence of mind, the consequences might have been considerably worse. She dealt with her ordeal in a quite remarkable manner. It was regrettable that in those circumstances she was not given the opportunity to address the court. The deficiencies in the Virginia investigation are outlined in detail. The separate incident in relation to Mr McGrath, who is currently in prison, was when he entered a house in Tipperary as a trespasser. Again, quite incredibly, a minor assault was noted. And this is where he entered a house and took a young child, again a girl, down the stairs in an attempt with his hand over her mouth, and was in effect abducting her from her own home. He was on bail while he did that, and he got bail again after that. And the incident in relation to the victim, the previous victim that had been assaulted, was noted as a minor assault. Conclusion, Mary Lynch was the victim of a savage assault and only escaped far more serious injury through her own bravery and initiative. The investigation into that offence was characterised by delay and a lack of effective supervision of the investigating member. Miss Roach Kelly was not well served by the fact that a considerable period of time elapsed in deciding who should investigate the complaint. And clearly, this is something that comes out of the report repeatedly, the failure to identify the person or the guard or the sergeant in charge repeatedly. Then we have Chapter 7 goes into an incident in a restaurant. The guard told the injured party that the complaint had gone to the DPP. That was incorrect. It had not gone to the DPP. And quite shockingly, there is criticism of McCabe by the Gardaí and the McGinn-Byrne report, and that was not upheld in any way. And there was a question even then of disciplining Sergeant McCabe. Luckily, that didn't happen at that point. In Chapter 8, we have the assault of another woman, this time a 17-year-old girl, no prosecution in the matter, no medical examination, and the interview is described as dismal. And there were contradictions between various Gardaí as to whether there was a sexual assault or a non-sexual assault. Reading it as a woman, as a mother, there was certainly grounds to look at this as a sexual assault. And again, it's back to Deputy Coppinger's points that she made in relation to the handling of violence against women. Chapter 9 deals with dangerous driving. 3 people were hit by a speeding car on the 27th of December 2007. Luckily, there were only minor injuries. The investigation, quoting directly from the Commission, the investigation never recovered from the fundamental failure of who was investigating it. Quite incredibly, disciplinary proceedings against Sergeant McCabe in this investigation were contemplated, and Judge O'Higgins says if they had gone ahead, they would have been entirely misconceived and unjustified. Chapter 10, assault at Crosslands Public House. Victim assaulted, brought to hospital, minor head injury. The victim made a statement, subsequently withdrawn. Again, Byrne and McGinn. According to the Commission, Byrne and McGinn suggest that the complaints by McCabe are largely unfounded, when actually the judge says the complaints were mainly justified. And the Commission is left with the impression that there was a reluctance to deal with the complaint of Sergeant McCabe on its merits. The statement of withdrawal was a matter of central importance in this investigation. The fact that it was the main reason for the charge not proceeding is not stated in McGinn-Burns's report at all. It is not surprising that Sergeant McCabe was sceptical of the findings of the Byrne-McGinn report in relation to this incident. And in relation to trust, Justice O'Higgins says, unfortunately, in this instance, the trust of the victim and her husband in the Gardaí was not justified. And finally, in the chapters on the incidents, we have Chapter 11, the Michael Malloy investigation and the missing computer at Caherley, which still remains missing. And on the 11th of September 2007, a man made a complaint that his son had been sexually abused by Father Michael Malloy, a priest. On July the 22nd, 2009, Father Malloy pleaded guilty to one account of defilement of a child under the age of 15 years, one account of defilement of a child under the age of 17 years, and one count of possession of child pornography. Conclusion: investigation was seriously flawed because of the matters set out in detail in the report, and the Commission has been unable to ascertain what happened to the computer. And again, significantly, it is difficult to understand why Sergeant McCabe was the only person subjected to disciplinary proceedings with regard to the missing computer. They are the incidences that the Minister refers to as some, and I don't see the Commissioner referring to those incidences whatsoever. In relation to the final 3 paragraphs, yes, the former Minister for Shatter deserves to have his name vindicated in relation to his quick response when the complaint was made to him. And yes, he deserves that unreservedly. And yes, the allegations of fraud in relation to some of the senior members wasn't found upheld. However, the vast majority of his complaints were held. They perhaps didn't fall under the title corruption, but they certainly fell under neglect of duty, the most basic things, the failure to hold an ID parade, the failure to take dated statements, the failure to follow up, the using of the wrong charges, the minimising of assaults and so on. Now, perhaps different members of the public would call that different names. Perhaps some would call it corruption. Certainly, there are serious concerns that have to be investigated. In relation to the conduct of policing, I think it's important to point out, as I've already pointed, I'm just going to now. In relation to Bailieborough Garda Station, although it's important to say that, again, I find it difficult, but the judge says that it didn't have an impact on the policing, that was personal, the guards doing it themselves. But it seems to me that one can't tell this story without looking at the Garda Station, the state it was left in the middle of the Celtic crisis. Page 342. Bailieborough Guard Station was built around 1870 as a barracks for the Royal Irish Constabulary. A flat-roofed single-storey extension was built in around 1970. and that's it. In 2007, a 2-floor prefabricated building was constructed in the station yard in an effort to improve conditions. And in 2008, work was done to the interior of the building. There is general agreement that Bailyburgh Garda Station was not fit for purpose. It is not necessary to document all the defects or inadequacies in the Garda Station, which was in a rundown and unfit condition. However, amongst the most notable defects are, and there's a whole list of them at Cahirley, which I won't go into, they amount to a page and a bit. Unsuitable reception facilities to process arrested persons, the lack of a suitable space to allow Gardaí to conduct an identification parade, inadequate clerical officer workspace, unsuitable blood urine doctor's room to process suspected excess alcohol, the fact that the sewage backup can occur which causes foul odour in the station. That was the conditions under which we let the Garda Síochána work. And quoting from the conditions in the station were deplorable, were not conducive to either good policing or good morale. In relation to the recommendations, and again they've gone outside of their remit in relation to these recommendations, but like Deputy Shorthall, I find it extraordinary that the final bullet point by the judge, bearing the foregoing in mind, and in the very particular circumstances pertaining, the Commission considers that the institution of any disciplinary proceedings which might conceivably arise out of its findings would not be helpful. I find that an extraordinary conclusion. Although there have been so many hearings and so many investigations that I can see why we would be reluctant to go down to any more investigations, one after the other, some better than the other, some more defective and so on. But we cannot forget that today there are members of the Gardaí who are petrified or are out on sick leave because of the way they're being treated, despite all the legislation that has been brought in. So there has been no sea change amongst certain members. And I, after reading all of this report of Cahirley, would have to say that I cannot put the blame on the Gardaí at the more junior rank. Certainly they have to take personal responsibilities for their failure and to learn from them. But it seems to me that the superintendents, the chief superintendents, the commissioners and the assistant commissioners, and the Commission notes this, there is a rota of senior members going to Bailyburgh Garda Station and then leaving, and the maximum time was 18 months, which it says doesn't allow for stability, proper supervision, or it doesn't provide a system where Gardaí feel they're being nurtured and where mistakes can be openly acknowledged, brought to the attention of the Gardaí and dealt with. And so, coming to a conclusion at Cahirley, I have to say, having had the time and the privilege of reflecting on this from the time it was first mentioned by the opposition parties in the Dáil, forcing the Minister and the Commissioner to look at this issue, having had the time to look at it and having taken the time to read it, I have to say I am most unhappy with the Minister's statement and I am unhappy with the Commissioner's statement. I do not feel they have read this report. I do not feel that they have appreciated what Sergeant McCabe and other guards have gone through when they persisted in bringing the defects to the attention of more senior Gardaí. And I really think it's important that we get to a stage where we acknowledge that and we work with the Garda Síochána. And I understand, in a sense, what the Judge O'Higgins is saying, in that the guards have worked under this shadow or this shade for some time, and it's time to move on. But you can't move on without learning from mistakes. And in fact, Judge O'Higgins points that out repeatedly, that you have to learn from mistakes. So, in a sense, in Gaeilge, Albert Jawan, Ikchak Saluk, Robert Ella. One side is contradicting another side. And I would be much happier if the Commissioner and the Minister had made a more open statement and expressed some outrage. or some horror that Sergeant McCabe had to go through all of this, and his family and the other guards that are going through it, notwithstanding Morris, notwithstanding Smithick, notwithstanding the bar in limited circumstances of that investigation. And to say this is unacceptable, and GSOC, who have also repeatedly pointed out that the Gardaí haven't come on board. When I say the Gardaí, I refer to the management. And I look forward, finally, the Commissioner is hiding behind the shield of her instructions. There's absolutely no obstacle to her telling us what instructions she gave to her legal team. Absolutely none. And in fact, the report was leaked on a drip-by-drip basis to reduce the standing of Sergeant McCabe in our eyes. The Commissioner has a duty to come in and tell us what instructions she gave. Thank you, Connolly.